Good morning, everyone. We're going to bring the Public Service Commission to order. Secretary Burgess, do we have any other changes to the agenda?
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. We have several changes to the agenda this morning. First, item 102, case 14G0175 and 14G0186. It's a matter of a natural gas incident at 52 Zariello Lane in West Haverstraw, and an enforcement proceeding against Orange and Rockland Utilities, Inc. is over. Item 367, case 14E0121, Consolidated Edison, tariff amendments to modify Rider L, the direct load control program, is also over. Moving to the regular agenda, item 371, case 03E0188, which is a renewable portfolio standard proceeding. Petition of Pace Energy regarding changes to rules for procuring renewable energy is being moved to the regular agenda and is renumbered item 303. In addition, the public agenda incorrectly stated that NYSERDA had filed a petition. This actually was filed by Pace Energy and others. Also moving to the regular agenda is item 375, case 03E0188, the Renewable Portfolio Standard Proceeding. This is a petition of NYSERDA regarding customer-cited tier unencumbered program funds. It's being moved to the regular agenda and renumbered item 304. And finally, adding to the consent agenda are two items in case 14G0212 in the matter of an investigation into the operator qualifications of persons who perform plastic fusions on natural gas facilities. These are numbered items 171 and 172. And those are all the changes to the agenda.
Okay. Thank you. We will get started. So today we have several reports on electric service reliability, electric and gas safety items, and these are for not for discussion items only. We're not going to be voting on them, but let's start with Raj. Can you give us an overview of what these are?
Good morning, Chair, Zibelman, and Commissioners. As you said, we'll be presenting different staff from different offices for informational purpose only for both electric and gas industries on quality of service provided by utilities to their customers, dealing with reliability, safety, and customer service. And the comments that I'm making are pretty generic for all these four items. As you probably know, the department has a rich history of data gathering and analysis of utility performance on quality of service that utilities provide to customers. For some of these measures, we have over a decade of standardized data, and for some, over 2 decades worth of standardized data. What this does is this allows us to, and the utilities, to perform both time series analysis, that is, over time, how the performance has changed, and look at trends, and cross-sectional analysis, that is, across utilities in the state, how utilities are performing, and to identify problems and take any corrective actions. I'm also happy to say that New York is one of the leaders in establishing the service quality standard requirements, and many states since then have followed New York. As we move to more and more performance-based rate making over the years, these measures, service quality measures, have taken on increased significance and importance. We want to ensure that as utility cost-cutting incentives are increased in our rate-making process through either multi-year rate cases and or decoupling of sales and profits, that the cost-cutting at the utilities happens through innovation and productivity improvements and not at the cost of sacrificing service quality and reliability to customers. So some of these standards are now part of utility service quality performance metrics that are embedded in rate cases for both gas and electric utilities. Failure to meet these metrics would entail financial consequences for the utilities. While these standards are pretty generic and uniform across the utilities, the performance levels are somewhat influenced by the system design and geography of the utilities, historical performance levels, and customer expectations. We shared these reports with all the utilities in the state so that any lessons learned by one can be used by others as warranted. With that generic overview, I'll turn it over to Chris Stalicki to begin discussion of the first item on gas utilities safety performance for 2013.
All right, good morning, Chair, Commissioners. Item 101 is the Gas Safety Performance Measures Report for 2013. This is the 11th annual report that examines New York local distribution companies, referred to as LDCs, performance in 3 areas pertaining to gas safety: excavation damage prevention, emergency response to gas leak and odor calls, and leak management. These performance measures are the result of collaborative efforts between staff and the LDCs to identify areas that are critical to gas safety. This report is intended to serve as a management tool by allowing for analysis of trends and identification of LDCs in need of improvement. Overall, the data indicate that LDC performance has greatly improved across the state. The damage prevention metrics describe the LDC's ability to minimize damages to buried facilities caused by excavation activities, the leading cause of natural gas pipeline failures and accidents both statewide and nationwide. There are 4 components of the damage prevention measure: damages due to mismarks or inaccurate marking of LDC's buried facilities, damages caused by company crews and the company's own contractors, damages resulting from third-party excavation error, and damages resulting from lack of notification by the excavator of intent to dig, referred to as no calls. These 4 components make up the overall damage prevention measure, which improved 4.7% statewide during 2013 when compared to 2012. Moreover, there has been a 71% improvement in the overall damage prevention measure since 2003. As can be seen by the graph, statewide performance has greatly improved over the years. For 2013, 3 of the damage components improved, while 1 declined slightly. Note the historical improvements with damages due to no calls. From 2003 to 2006, statewide improvement was 28%. Since mid-2007, all LDCs have participated in an effort to provide staff with details of damages due to no calls for possible enforcement actions. Even though there was a slight decrease in performance during 2013, partly driven by post-Sandy restoration work, many have reported this to be a beneficial program that has contributed to greater awareness of the one-call regulations, and these type of damages have clearly declined. I will now discuss the emergency response measure. This measure tracks LDC's ability to respond promptly to reports of gas leaks or emergencies by examining the percentage of calls that fall within various response times. There are 3 specific response goals: respond to 75% of emergency calls within 30 minutes, 90% within 45 minutes, and 95% within 60 minutes. Statewide performance improved in all 3 measures, mostly driven by improvements in downstate performance. Continuous improvement requires LDCs to effectively manage resources by positioning qualified responders to be in locations when and where leak calls are expected to occur. Finally, the leak management measure describes LDC's performance in effectively maintaining leak inventories and keeping potentially hazardous leaks to a minimum. It measures the year-end backlog of potentially hazardous leaks that require repair. After an increase of 8% in 2012, mostly attributed to the impacts of Sandy, the statewide result for 2013 was a 31% decrease in the year-end backlog over 2012, a year later. Moreover, since year-end 2003, the statewide backlog has decreased over 90%. The report provides greater detail into individual LDC performance over the past several years. As LDCs work to eliminate aging infrastructure from their distribution systems through replacement with new material, the number of leaks that occur are expected to decrease. Staff's analysis of each performance measure identifies specific areas where certain LDCs have room for improvement. An example would be those LDCs that have higher rates of damages than others across the state. We are recommending that those LDCs perform self-analyses in these areas and identify and report to staff the incremental actions they will implement to improve performance. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. This concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
if we were to normalize for Sandy, what would did you look at what would be the difference between 11 and 13? I mean, it looks to me like it's even a trend down from there.
It is a continuous trend down. We haven't specifically taken the data out from downstate grid companies and Con Ed, but that is something we could do.
There's just a curious observation. But anyway, I have no further questions. I think in all of these, my general comment is it does really show that once we start measuring elements, we can see improvement, and sort of that adage, unless you measure, you can't improve, is pretty clear here. What I'd like to talk about, but we could do it afterwards, is maybe a little bit on the process we use to go forward. Because as in any other situation, once we start seeing improvements, if there are other areas that we find that there's weaknesses, how do we now start to either not continue to measure things once we've addressed a problem, and maybe add new areas, because there's obviously always an area of continuous monitoring and improvement. But maybe we can go through the rest, and we can come back to that question. But any other questions for either Raj or Chris at this point?
I just want to make one comment. It's tremendous success here on the year-end backlog. It would be wonderful now that we're getting to this low of a number, and I know new things always crop up, but to get into double digits next year would be, I think, quite an accomplishment as we aim towards zero.
I'm going to save my comments till the end. To all of them.
Yes. Okay. The next item then that we're going to be talking about is for the report on utility energy service quality, and Sonny Mose from the Utility Consumer Program Special in the Office of Consumer Policy. Sonny, welcome, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Chair Zilberman. Good morning. This item summarizes the electric and natural gas utilities performance for 2013 on measures of service quality, which includes two types of measure: standardized key performance indicators reported by all of the utilities, and customer service performance incentives, which are unique to each utility and include negative revenue adjustments for unsatisfactory customer service performance. Customer service performance incentives help to align shareholder and ratepayer interests by providing potential earning consequences to shareholders that reflect the quality of service to utility customers. Every major gas and electric company in New York State has these mechanisms in place. They have typically been negotiated within the context of individual utility rate cases. For all of the utilities, the incentive mechanisms contain targets for PSC complaint rates and for survey measures of customer satisfaction. Some also include targets for other more specific measures of utility performance. The good news is that, for the most part, the electric and gas utilities' performance has steadily improved over the last several years, and this trend continued in calendar year 2013. For example, Corning Gas and Natural Fuel each had no escalated complaints for the entire year. National Grid Long Island improved from its 2012 performance on the adjusted bills measure, and National Grid Upstate's complaints rate for 2013 was one of the lowest since its customer satisfaction performance incentive was implemented. However, these two companies also reported performance deficits in 2013. National Grid Upstate failed to meet its first quarter performance target of enrolling 898 customers in its low-income affordability program, which resulted in a negative revenue adjustment of $50,000. This is automatically deferred for the benefit of customers pursuant to National Grid Upstate's rate plan, and no commission action is required. In addition, National Grid Long Island reported that it did not meet its performance target level of 83.4% in customer satisfaction, which resulted in a negative revenue adjustment of $4,455,000. The company has filed a petition asking that the Commission waive this negative revenue adjustment because the company believes that its 2013 customer satisfaction performance was negatively impacted by the Superstorm Sandy, which was not in the company's control. That request is under review. Given this record, overall, we believe the customer service performance incentives currently in at the utilities in New York State establish strong standards for performance and subject significant amounts of shareholder earnings at risk for non-performance. Overall, the customer service performance incentive mechanisms implemented by the Commission, coupled with staff's ongoing monitoring efforts, have been effective in making the quality of service to customers a corporate priority and providing criteria for ensuring that the quality of customer service remains at high levels. Staff will continue to monitor customer service quality provided by utilities to ensure the fair and appropriate treatment of utility customers across the state. In addition, staff will continue to promote performance-based rate-making strategies relating to customer service quality in conformance with Commission policies. This completes my presentation on the Energy Utilities Customer Service Performance Report for 2013. I would be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you, Sonny. Any questions? At the end? None. Okay, thank you. And moving on then to the third item, which is the compliance report on stray voltage testing and inspections. And Jason Paz, who's a power systems operations specialist, will be presenting that. Welcome, Jason.
Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. Today I will be providing an overview of the electric safety standards and the utilities compliance for 2013. I will start with some background information on the safety standards. The original order was adopted by the Commission in January 2005 after the unfortunate death of Jody Lane in New York City due to stray voltage in 2004. The order included stray voltage testing of all electric facilities on an annual basis, inspections of electrical facilities on a 5-year cycle, shock reporting requirements, and the adoption of the National Electric Safety Code as the minimum standard for utility construction, maintenance, and operations. The overall goal of the safety standards is to safeguard the public from exposure to stray voltage and to identify and eliminate any potentially harmful conditions before safety hazards and/or reliability deficiencies develop. Since 2005, there have been several modifications to the order. These modifications were a result of lessons learned from previous year's activities and results to effectively administer and manage the utilities' efforts. New York's electric safety standards continue to have some of the most stringent requirements when compared to other states across the nation. Some other states have adopted similar parts of the safety standards, such as stray voltage testing or inspections in modified formats. However, no other state requires such a comprehensive effort with both manual and mobile stray voltage testing, shock reporting, inspections, and associated repairs by the utilities. With the latest modifications to the safety standards order, the utilities are required to test its underground and streetlight facilities on an annual basis, while testing its overhead, pad mount transformers, underground residential distribution, and transmission facilities on the same 5-year cycle as the inspection requirements. Voltage findings of 1 volt or more are required to be recorded and mitigated. These 1 volt or less findings are not considered to be safety concerns, while also providing an aggressive mitigation effort by the utilities. Each of the utilities met the requirements of the standards, with all of the approximately 1.2 million electric facilities requiring testing being completed in 2013. Of those facilities tested, there were 1,208 voltage findings. Streetlights continue to be the largest facility grouping with stray voltage findings. Streetlights are typically owned by and a responsibility of the local municipality and not the electric utility. Looking at the historical manual stray voltage findings, you can see that the total number of findings has decreased since the requirements began in 2005. This can be attributed to both the testing and inspection efforts to date. For streetlights, the overall trend is downward. However, the number of voltage findings did increase slightly in 2013 compared to the previous year in Con Edison and National Grid's service territory. Both utilities continue to work with the local municipalities to improve these results. National Grid has also implemented a comprehensive streetlight program in Buffalo to replace the antiquated standards, cable, and ductwork that serve those facilities in the city. For mobile stray voltage testing, the safety standards require 12 mobile surveys in New York City, 2 mobile surveys in Buffalo, and 1 mobile survey in Yonkers, White Plains, New Rochelle, Albany, Niagara Falls, and Rochester each year. These locations were selected due to their population density and the number of stray voltage findings in each city. Again, any volt finding of 1 volt or more is reported and mitigated. In 2013, there were a total of 8,137 voltage findings in these 3 utility service territories where mobile stray voltage testing is required. Looking at the historical results, in the 2005 through 2008 timeframe, Con Edison was the only utility required to perform mobile stray voltage testing, and the number of mobile surveys varied from year to year depending on the conditions. With the modifications to the order in 2008, National Grid, Con Edison, and RG&E were required to perform a specific number of mobile surveys each year starting in 2009. This graph represents the total number of voltage findings, shown in black, compared to the voltage findings under 4.5 volts, shown in red. Overall, the majority of the findings continued to be low voltage in nature and attributed to non-utility and streetlight facilities. For electric shock reports, utilities are required to track, respond to, and mitigate any electric shock calls reported and found to be the utility's responsibility. A bad ground or neutral connection at the service point are some of the typical issues found to cause shock hazards and the utility's responsibility to fix. There was a total of 206 shock reports called into the utilities in 2013. However, almost 2/3 of those shock reports were found to be the customer's responsibility versus the responsibility of the utility. This chart shows the historical results of the shock reports. Even though there was a slight increase in shock reports in 2013 compared to 2012, the overall trend is for these incidents to decrease since the inception due to customer awareness and public outreach. Moving on to the inspection efforts. Utilities are required to inspect 20% of its electric facilities each year, and all within 5 years. This includes overhead, underground, pad mount transformers, underground residential distribution, transmission, and streetlight facilities to help identify safety and/or reliability concerns proactively. For 2013, approximately 828,000 inspections were performed, and all utilities met and completed the minimum 20% inspection requirement. The safety standards also require deficiencies found during inspections to be categorized for repairs based on the level of severity and effect on public safety. Level 1 deficiencies are required to be repaired within 7 days. Level 2 are required to be repaired within 1 year, and Level 3s need to be repaired within 3 years. There are approximately 139,000 deficiencies identified by the utilities in 2013 on a statewide basis. This graph shows the history of deficiencies found during inspections going back to 2009, when the utilities were first required to report on and track inspections and deficiencies results in a uniform manner. These results have varied from year to year. However, with increased repair efforts and capital expenditures, we would expect the total number of deficiencies to reduce over time. For an inspection program to be meaningful, the data collected must be used to promote repair activities. In general, the utilities have maintained good response times for repairing deficiencies. In 2013, the utilities reported repairing 98% of the Level 1 deficiencies within the required 7-day time frame. Those not repaired were made safe to mitigate the risk to the public. As of 2013, the utilities reported repairing 98% of Level 2 deficiencies and 90% of Level 3 deficiencies found since 2009 statewide. The utilities continue to track these deficiencies in an acceptable level of response, and even though improvements still can be had, the goal continues to be the improvement of the overall system health and safety statewide. Lastly, the safety standards include a performance mechanism to ensure the utilities comply with the order's requirements on both testing and inspections. The utilities have met these requirements for 2013 and have done so since the inception in 2005. No negative revenue adjustments have been incurred. In conclusion, staff is satisfied with the overall performance of the utilities in relation to the safety standards and its requirements. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Jason, in terms of the stray voltage, and you identified, I think, an increase in 1 year from 2012. How much is that, or 2013? How much is that related to weather and salting conditions?
We do see spikes in the amount of stray voltage found, especially down in New York City when there are snowstorms. And actually, the Condescen's required to they do an additional survey if there is a certain amount of snow that has fallen during a storm. They'll follow up with a survey to try to catch any additional stray voltage incidents that do occur. But it does impact the conditions.
And are you seeing, too, among the utilities, and Sonny, this can go to you as well, a best practice sharing as they operationalize how they're meeting these standards?
Yes, the utilities are always talking to each other. We actually meet with the utilities on a regular basis and talk about best practices and what can be improved in the years going forward. They standardize on their inspection process and as far as what they're categorizing each incident to be for repair deficiencies in their efforts. So we do see that.
Sonny, do you see anything on your side on the customer service?
I think the customers, we meet with the utilities in most times during rate cases and try to look at the customer satisfaction performance incentives, looking at how consistent we can make those targets and the improvements that needs to be done statewide. So from that point of view, we actually do meet with each other to see how they could actually make up best practices from each utility to see how it could actually apply to the other utilities who are operating within the same framework.
Great, thank you. Further questions? Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, just, Jason, the list of cities where we're doing testing. I believe what we did was we did testing in all the cities. We found some cities that seemed to show some chronic problems and others that didn't seem to have any problems. And so we required the annual tests in Buffalo, Rochester, White Plains, etc. We didn't require tests in some other cities. I guess my question is, how periodically do we go back to those cities, make sure that there's not emerging problems where we're not having the annual testing? How do we discover whether Syracuse still doesn't appear to have any issues that require annual testing?
Well, they still do manual testing in those areas. So if we did see a spike with those efforts, with the manual testing, that might be something that we could bring up and add the mobile to it as well.
So is that something you do look at along the way to make sure that
we're always looking at the number of incidents and seeing where they spike, but unfortunately it's typically in the same locations.
Right. Thank you, Jason.
Question. Any further questions for Jason? Commissioner Akinpur.
Jason, have there been any serious injuries in the past year?
No, not
or
that,
even during Sandy?
Not that we've been during Sandy. There was a death during Sandy or Irene, right? But nothing significant other than the major storms. And again, that it was caused by the storm, not by anything that was
right.
Utility failure or anything like that.
I really think that this program has done quite a bit, and I'm glad that we continue and you continue to evaluate to see if there is need in any other places, so that you could bring the mobile testing in if you thought you needed it. Thank you.
I'm going to wait till the last report. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, and then our last report, I believe, is Christian Bovin, who will be reporting on the electric reliability performance in New York State and Christian is the utility supervisor out of the Office of Electric, Gas, and Water. So Christian, welcome, and please begin.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I'll be providing you an overview of the electric reliability performance in New York State for 2013. The information presented today focuses on statewide performances. However, our report provides individual analysis of each of the major electric utilities. The ability of a utility to provide reliable electric service is fundamental to the department, and staff uses several means to monitor and evaluate service reliability. First, electric utilities are required to submit detailed monthly interruption data under Part 97. By obtaining this data, staff is able to calculate various performance measures. This interruption data is maintained in a database that dates back to 1989. Next, utilities are required to submit annual reliability reports. These reports not only look at the company as a whole, but report on performances within individual operating areas and identify areas where improvements may be needed. We also use reliability performance mechanisms, or RPMs, to gauge reliability. As Raj indicated, the RPMs are determined as part of each rate case, and because the RPMs impose negative revenue adjustments for failing to meet a target, the targets often reflect system-wide averages rather than the detailed operating data. The RPMs also include additional measures to cover the areas of concern, such as mileage targets to promote the appropriate level of tree trimming. In general, our approach is to maintain appropriate service levels compared to driving ever better performance, as the cost to achieve the incremental improvement may be prohibitive. To gauge reliability, staff relies on two primary measures: the frequency of interruptions and the average duration of the service interruptions. Both of these measures are common industry-accepted calculations. Frequency is influenced by factors such as system design, capital investment, maintenance practices, and weather. Decisions made by the utilities today on capital expenditures and maintenance, for better or worse, can take several years before being fully reflected in the frequency measure. Duration is affected by workforce levels, management of the workforce, and geography. Changes in these policies, however, have a more immediate effect. Part 97 defines large or long-lasting interruptions due to severe weather as major storms. By reviewing the statistics with and without major storms, we're able to compare data over time and trend to identify areas of concern. By their nature, the frequency and the duration measures fluctuate as conditions change year to year. When major storms are excluded, normal variances on a company basis tend to be less than 1/10 for frequency and 2/10 for duration. Finally, we use cause codes to identify areas where increased work activity may be needed or confirm that specific programs are effective. The graph shown presents the last 10 years' performance for frequency on a statewide basis, excluding major storms. On this graph, a measure of 1 indicates that the average customer experiences a single outage per year. For 2013, the statewide frequency performance was equivalent to the past 5 years' average. Because of an inherently lower frequency due to its system design, Con Edison's data can skew the overall statistics. As a result, we look at the statewide performances excluding Con Edison. As shown by the green bars, the frequency performance for 2013 for all other utilities other than Con Edison was also consistent with past performances. This next chart shows the last 10-year performances for duration on a statewide basis, again excluding major storms. For duration, a measure of 2 means the average customer affected by an outage in the year was without service for 2 hours. That said, some customers close to the damage area would be affected for longer, while others would have shorter durations as they could be served by alternate sources or field ties. For 2013, the duration performances were improved compared to recent years. And again, looking at the data without Con Edison, we see that the duration performances were also consistent with historic levels. As I mentioned earlier, we use reliability performance mechanisms as part of rate cases to help maintain reliability performances. In 2013, all companies met their frequency and duration RPM targets, and therefore no revenue adjustments are necessary. With respect to individual performances, the utilities performed satisfactorily in 2013. In fact, Central Hudson, Orange and Rockland, and PSEG Long Island performed better than their last 5-year averages for both frequency and duration. National Grid and NYSEG experienced several minor storms, and while these storms were not severe enough to be excludable, they did raise the overall frequency performance compared to the recent trends. Despite the increase in frequency, however, both National Grid and NYSEG were able to respond to the events appropriately and perform well with respect to duration. Con Edison performed satisfactorily with regard to its network performance and with respect to the frequency on its radial or overhead system. We noted, however, that although Con Edison met its RPM duration target on its radial system, its past 2 years' performances were close to the target of 2.04 hours. A closer analysis of the data by borough showed that Queens and the Bronx are responsible, as they are the only 2 areas over the RPM level. Therefore, the company's immediate efforts should focus on developing strategies targeted at improving reliability performance in the Bronx and Queens. Staff will interact with the company to ensure changes are implemented, as well as monitor and report on the effectiveness of these changes in future reports. This concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. It's a good presentation. As a general matter, I think that we're all pleased to see that the trends in all of these areas are in the right direction. And as I mentioned, I think it also reflects the fact that when we start measuring elements, we can actually focus on them, shine a spotlight on potential areas that need improvement and get that improvement. I believe that going forward, particularly with the REV docket and looking at more performance bases, we'll really need to think about what mechanisms and measures we put in place, how they're linked, and as well as how they get tied to other outcome-based performances that we're going to want to see, particularly for the electric utilities. But I think for all the utilities, we'll continue to want to make sure that we're measuring the right things. If we get to a point where we're operationalizing improvements and it becomes standard operating practices, we're also thinking all the time about what other areas of Achilles heels that we might have that we want to explore and make certain that we're doing the right things. Certainly I'm aware that in addition to these areas, we also have activity around physical and cybersecurity. We need to think about how we're using that. Certainly we have the major storm scorecard that also influences behavior. So I think it's probably a good time for us to sit back and really think about going forward. Are there other areas that we need to explore, and are we making sure that not only do we have the right complement, but can we sort of say seems to be in an area that now we've gotten where we need to go. Now let's think about what else do we need to move forward. So I would ask staff to come back and give us some thoughts on that. I also think that the management audits and the operational audits probably reveal potential areas that we can focus on, and that could also maybe influence what we think about what do we need to measure. I'm bringing this up because several of us just spent a few days with fellow commissioners, and it's clear to us as we look at where we are that New York is very aggressive we're really ahead of the pack in many areas, sometimes because, I guess, out of unpleasant experiences that we realized we learned in a way that we didn't want to, but I think because of the thoughtfulness. And I was struck, actually, I'm not sure if my fellow commissioners might have heard this before, but particularly in the area of physical and cybersecurity, we're way ahead of what other folks have been thinking about. They're just now starting to think that maybe this is something they need to worry about. So I'm pleased with where we are. I just think just as we ask the utilities to continuously improve, we have an opportunity to continuously improve and make sure we're measuring the right things, and continue to make sure that from the outcome base around reliability, security, resiliency, and price, that we're making the right direct decisions. But in whole, I'm very pleased to see these outcomes and congratulate both the staff and the utilities, because I know there's an awful lot of work that goes behind this, and we just get the headlines. So thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Berman, you've been very patient.
Thank you, and thank you for your comments. I think they were very, very helpful. The primary mission of the New York State Department of Public Service, as you know, is to ensure safe, secure, and reliable access to electric, gas, steam, telecommunications, and water services for New York State's residential and business customers at just and reasonable rates. And when I look at these annual reports, I see that this is really sort of putting it all together for what our mission is. And when I also look at it, and over these last 2 weeks in preparing for session, I've been drilling with staff on the annual reports. I had asked for the past 5-year reports, and one staff member said, "You're not really going to read all the annual reports, are you?" And I said, "Oh, yes, several times I will." And I did. And part of the reason I did was because I wanted to get a flavor for the historical perspective of the annual reports, and also to understand, was it just an exercise in the checkoff box of we have to do this annual thing and present it to the commission, or is it really something that we are embracing in, sort of what the chair spoke about, is in trying to see where we're at and see where we need to be. And what the flavor that I got from the reports, and I also went back and looked at the transcripts for the last 5 years too, is that there is a sense of the importance of the mission that we have here, and the importance of using this for not just every session in June stating what's been done, but what's happening. And there is a trend. 1 year vegetation management was very important, and the need to get a handle on vegetative management. Another year, the different storms and trying to get a handle on where things are at. Cybersecurity is another issue. So for me, it's clear to me that the professionalism that staff has on a daily basis, you live and breathe all of this. You live and breathe the mission of what we're regulating. And I really do believe that the work that you do can and does save lives. We can't measure the catastrophes that are avoided. I became a staff member shortly after the Jody Lane incident, and it had a dramatic effect on me, as I know it did on the utilities as well as the other staff members. And it has changed the course of how we conduct ourselves. And just like all the cybersecurity and other incidences that we do, we want to make sure that we properly regulate. And I thank you for your professionalism, for your dedication, and for your hard work that you do. And I'm here to help and be there to make sure that we carry out the function and the mission that we have to do. And I look forward to the report that's going to be given out to the utilities. I know they take seriously the report, and they work with us in partnership to make proper decisions and work together to make sure that we're doing what we need to do to have safe, reliable service to the people of New York. So thank you.
Thank you. Further comments? Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Behrman. That was well said and I'm sure appreciated by staff. Okay. Now, we're moving on to renewable portfolio standard. Does there need to be a changing of the guard here? Okay. Tina, that's a lot of people who don't want to sit next to you.
I was going to say how impressive it is that one person replaces 6.
Or how she can clear a room so quickly.
Good morning, Ms. Palomero.
You need to announce or do I discuss?
So, this is with respect to item 303, which is case 3E0188, and it's renewable portfolio standard proceeding, petition of Pace Energy, and it's regarding changes to the rules for procuring renewable energy. Ms. Palomero, who's chief of the Office of Electric Efficiency and the Environment, is here to present it. Hi, Tina, and please go ahead.
Hello, and thank you, and good morning or afternoon, commissioners. This item before you, as you stated, addresses a petition filed by Pace Energy and several other environmental and public interest groups requesting that the Commission authorize NYSERDA to change program rules to allow it to offer longer-term contracts and alternative incentive structures in future main-tier solicitations in the RPS program. Under current program rules, NYSERDA pays a fixed price production incentive under a 10-year term to renewable energy facilities in exchange for the rights to the renewable energy attributes of those bid facilities. Facilities are awarded contracts through requests for proposals, sealed pay-as-bid auctions. In response to the Pace Energy petition, staff recommends that the Commission authorize NYSERDA to increase the length of contract terms up to a maximum of 20 years in future solicitations through the program term, which is 2015. Staff believes this change is necessary if we are continue to attract large-scale renewable development in New York State. The current 10-year contract term is no longer sufficient to properly incent facilities to bid in our program, as evidenced by stalled or canceled projects in the New York ISO queue, and the less than robust response we received in the last main tier solicitation. Extensive discussions with market participants, NYSERDA, and their consultants reveal that the 10-year fixed-price REC contracts have made it difficult for developers to secure financing at reasonable costs, leaving them to seek markets in adjacent states that have more attractive contracting structures that allow them to better mitigate risk. By allowing NYSERDA to provide longer-term contracts, developers will be able to get the long-term revenue certainty that will hopefully mitigate their risk and translate into more robust solicitations with overall lower bid prices, which will be good for the ratepayers of New York. In the near term, staff is not recommending that NYSERDA offer alternative incentive structures, such as variable priced RECs tied to the energy markets. These are also known as contracts for differences, or provide for a standard offer price for each technology. Each of these mechanisms adds additional complexities to the solicitation and evaluation process that would hamper our efforts for NYSERDA to get a solicitation out as soon as possible. However, staff believes those incentive mechanisms have merit and should be considered for post-2015 program considerations, noting that the Commission has launched the Clean Energy Fund and REV proceedings that will examine in varying degrees the role of utilities in establishment of markets and procuring and deploying clean energy resources, including renewable generation. other than lifting the 10-year term for contracts, all other RPS program rules and general procurement methods are recommended to remain in place. Staff recommends providing NYSERDA with flexibility in setting maximum contract terms for specific technologies and for facilities that are eligible to compete in the solicitation. The new rules in extending the contract terms, we recommend that this not be allowed for facilities with existing 10-year contracts to come in seeking to extend those contracts. The new solicitations for 2014 and 2015 would be for facilities that do not currently have a contract with NYSERDA. We also recommend that NYSERDA develop a bid evaluation methodology in consultation with DPS staff designed to place bids of different contract lengths and price on comparable terms using a net present value of lifetime contract payments or some other similar methodology. And also, since there is uncertainty in the renewal of the federal production tax credit that expired at the end of 2013, we believe that the Commission should direct NYSERDA to provide a provision to capture the value of the PTC in future solicitations. Finally, in complying with previous Commission policy, staff urges the Commission to direct NYSERDA to issue a solicitation as soon as possible in 2014 and offer at least one additional solicitation in 2015. So we see, this program rule change is a bridge to what our ultimate decisions or what the Commission's ultimate decisions will be for the program post-2015. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. I just one observation to make. I've been involved, I think, in the wind industry since 1991, and I think every year we've talked about the fact that we don't know whether the PTC is going to be renewed. I don't know what the wind industry would do if it ever had certainty around taxes policy. A couple things. One is I appreciate the fact that the concern here is that we want to be able to cost effectively attract renewables into the mix, and they're important for a couple of purposes. One, obviously, for emission reduction. The other is, quite frankly, as Mr. Myers continues to point out, they're energy-intensive resources that have low fuel costs and zero fuel costs, and so they're also a great hedge against price volatility. So they have both economic and environmental benefits. So I think that's great, and from what I take from your comments, is that one of the reasons we need to move to a longer duration is the concern that the shorter duration is just going to mean that the kind of companies that we want to bid into our process are just going to go somewhere else, which sort of begs my next question is, in talking to some of the vendors, is it your sense that in making this change we'll be able to attract or retain projects that would otherwise depart?
Yes, recent discussions with participants who indicated desire to, locate in New York and have projects in New York, while, realizing that there's other alternative mechanisms, as I, mentioned, contracts for differences. They think in the short term, in order to get a solicitation out there, yes, this extending the contract length to 20 years will, definitely help with some financing, and they have indicated their desire to participate in the program.
Okay. And then with regard to future initiatives, I agree with you that both the Clean Energy Fund and REV need to be looking at this issue. And again, I think the fact of the matter is that, and particularly with 111D, states are going to continue and probably will become increasingly competitive around trying to attract resources to meet their obligations. So it's going to be important that we think about, as we're thinking about all of the issues we're dealing with, reducing fuel volatility, maintaining fuel diversity, meeting our environmental obligations as well as keeping prices down, that we have a mechanism in place that is going to make this to work effectively. I'm not sure if we're going to see this specifically in the Clean Energy Fund filing that we're anticipating, but I think it would be helpful for the Commission if we can come back and reflect upon where specifically the staff is recommending that we address these issues, and in what time period. Because if we are going to make another market adjustment, we need to give the market enough signals so that they understand what's going on and people will plan accordingly. Which raises my next question, is if folks know that we may be going to someplace else, is there a risk that they won't participate because they'll wait for the next iteration? And what have you in your conversations, have you kind of gotten any sense of that?
Yes, I think developers who have played in the New York RPS, realize that the program term is up in 2015. They realize that a program review has been ongoing, and then with the launching of the Clean Energy Fund initiative, are waiting to see what's going to happen. But again, speaking with them, they think these near-term changes are important, and would welcome, additional changes if it meant that it would help further mitigate their risk, through hedging. As part of the Clean Energy Fund, there is a stakeholder process going now. This topic will be, one of many topics, but what we do with large-scale renewables in the future of the program post-2015 is definitely on the table for discussion. So we're hoping to have, some clear direction.
I would think, too. I mean, we're going to have to link this. I'm looking at Rudy back into Rev 2 and in terms of the roles of the distribution utilities moving forward. Okay, thank you. And last observation is, I know that Massachusetts has recently changed its procurement program. I think it will also be helpful for us all, because it is a regional market, and it's something that Commissioner Akinpur and I have recently discussed, is for us to think about how, as a state, we and I would put this, not just the Commission, but also members who are interested in this, how we're seeing trends go outside of New York. Again, I don't want to be in a position that we're constantly changing our program to catch up. So we need to do this balance of having a cost-effective program that we're satisfied with, but in doing so, be cognizant of other trends so we understand at least what else people are doing. So I suspect that will be part of your research as you move on.
Yes, definitely.
Great. Thank you. Any further questions, Commissioner Sayre?
I think this change makes very simple financial sense to me. You can't build any of these projects unless you've got financing. And the Green Bank can't do it all. And in any event, we'd rather have financing and let the Green Bank supplement where private financing won't come in. So if you have contract terms that are more in line with the expected useful life of the assets that are being built, you're going to reduce both the business risk and the financial risk, which, as you said, is good for the ratepayers because it reduces the annual cost, because the financial markets can afford a lower interest rate. So I commend you for this proposal.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Are you okay, Commissioner Berman? I'm trying to be balanced.
First of all, thank you. I know you've spent a lot of time with me the last few weeks, so I apologize. I do have a couple of questions. You did an excellent presentation, and I very much appreciate it. And the chair asked a lot of questions that I was going to ask, and you answered it. But I just want to make sure that I fully understand, and I am very, very supportive. There were 8 solicitations since the RPS. Actually, 9 technically, but 8 because one was pulled back. And looking at the 8, and we had discussed this internally, but I want to just flesh it out. I'm mostly focused on the 2013 solicitation.
Right. Just one clarification. There have only been 8. There was the 8th one was first issued in December of 2012, and then it was reissued in January of 2013.
Right,
so the same
right.
solicitation, just reissued at a later date. Correct.
So it's 8.
Right.
That one
Right.
pulled back.
Right.
So, and again, this isn't a trick question. I'm just, don't worry. I'm just looking at it. So what I looked at when I looked at the 8 is the solicitations that were issued and then the amounts of money that was actually authorized. And for the most part, every year except for 2013, the amount that was solicited, so it was
Offered, right.
offered, was pretty much in line, whether it was $100 million and then maybe it was $97 million that was actually authorized. Pretty much it matched up, except for 2013. It was $250 million that had the solicitation, but it was only $66 million that was actually authorized.
Right.
Can you explain that gap?
Sure, and I think I spoke to that when I said, the reason why staff believes this change is needed to go from a 10-year contract to up to a 20-year contract is because there was sort of this lackluster response in the last solicitation. And when NYSERDA and staff, when a solicitation goes out, we set a maximum ceiling price as well.
Right.
So any bids that come over that ceiling price are rejected. That's to make sure that, we don't take any facility at all costs. So, and as I recall in that solicitation, there were projects that were well above the ceiling that we had. But there was also projects that did win bids that did not end up going into contract with NYSERDA. And, one had admitted that, they would rather play in another market, because there were better terms in an adjacent state. So they forfeited their deposit to go elsewhere. So hence that's why you only saw the $66 million of contracted facilities, because it wasn't as robust of a solicitation, and some contracts did not come to fruition.
And since the solicitations, so for the 8 solicitations, the Commission has never actually stated to NYSERDA the solicitation should be for X amount. They've determined what that solicitation funding should be.
In the very early years, prior to 2010, every solicitation first needed commission authorization. So in those authorizations, these orders, I believe a term, or I'm sorry, an amount was set. I can't recall if that was the case for every order. Since 2010, the Commission's policy is that NYSERDA, make sure you issue at least one solicitation a year. The solicitations amounts have been pretty consistent between 200 and 250 million, and that's based on a couple of things, the collection schedule, and also sort of some market intel to see what the competitiveness of the solicitation is. They want to make sure they can keep these solicitations as competitive as possible, so that influences to some degree the amount they're going to offer, depending on who they think are going to play in the market. Okay. So that's had some bearing.
The 2010 Commission order really was after the 2009 RPS review,
right,
which determined that the RPS policy needed to be more flexible so that more people could, market participants could participate in a more robust RPS program, take advantage of it, and have more bang for the buck in the RPS program. And part of the philosophy behind allowing NYSERDA to have more flexibility and giving them the authority to have at least one solicitation a year without having to come to the commission was so that there was not a bureaucratic
correct.
hang up in
Correct.
getting the solicitation out the door.
Correct.
Is that okay?
That is correct.
All right. So I'm very comfortable with giving them the flexibility. Today's order is good in that we're trying to correct what seems to have been the problem from the 2013 solicitation. I think it's Massachusetts and Connecticut had what seemed to have at least been one of the problems with the 2013 solicitation, in that we weren't able to fulfill all the $250 million that was out there, that people went elsewhere, or at least that's one of the stated reasons for that there was this holdup. Though technically NYSERDA could have issued this solicitation earlier than this order, but at least for us, we're now saying that policy, which allows an annual solicitation, we're affirmatively directing them and giving, I think, some certainty to the market participants who have been anxiously awaiting that. And I think ambiguity and uncertainty is never a good thing with renewable energy policies. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement, and I just want to make a couple of comments and some observations. It had always been our intention to do an annual solicitation, and I think in 2011 there was 2 offered, and the Commission provided NYSERDA and staff that flexibility. If market conditions were right, put out as many solicitations as you think would yield good results at cost-effective prices. We've had some fits and starts, again, even after that 2010 policy. The uncertainty of the federal production tax credit, had made us do some rethinking about what prices we were going to get, and we had to put in some clawback provisional language in one of the solicitations. Even as far as this year, NYSERDA and staff very early in 2014, we were talking about the next solicitation, very concerned that if we didn't change the program rules to offer longer-term contracts, that nobody would come to the table and we'd have another, lackluster solicitation. And then at the same time, this petition came in that called for looking at alternative incentive structures. So, we looked... we turned to a consultant, we talked with market participants, and when we found out what all the complexities were for variable price contracts, we said, let's just go out, try to finish this program term through 2015. It's better to put something out there in the market, a reasonable solicitation with longer-term tenor contracts, and we think, it will definitely be more robust than what we had seen in the 8th main tier solicitation. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of a compromise, but knowing that other alternative mechanisms are out there, they should be examined, and focused on, I think, for post-2015 procurement possibilities. So yes, the long-winded answer is yes, but that's why we had some of these fits and starts.
I think this is a very good thing. I mean, ultimately, the design of any renewable energy policy in a state has to be tailored to meet the state's specific goals and policies and a mix of available renewable resources and other circumstances, including, if appropriate, competitive market forces and that are unique to that state. And here, kudos to Richard Kaufman, who has come in and said that competitive market forces are something that, competitive markets are something that, we as a state are embracing, and has started an initiative, and that I think all of the renewable policies and programs have to work together. RPS is a compatible program that we're looking at, and this and the PSC is working with NYSERDA and NYPA and others in trying to fit all of the different programs together. And the REV docket is one that we're looking at. The Clean Energy Fund is another, that trying to figure out and fit all of the different things together and make some clear policy decisions and initiatives, and not do it in a vacuum. So I think what's clear to me is that we're starting now to gel things together and not also hold up things. So for me, that ambiguity and uncertainty that has been there is starting to fade away, at least on this piece. And that is something that I can embrace because that's what's necessary. So I'm very, very happy to see that and look forward to the other pieces as well. I'll be there. And part of that is, the partnership that I'd like to see is having those discussions. People need to be able to talk about those things and work through them. The expertise that everyone can bring to the table and look at those things is very important. And so I'm glad to see that. These are critical times and critical decisions that have to be made. So I'm supportive of that.
Great.
And NYSERDA has a lot to do on getting the solicitation out, the flexibility that has to be there, and the market participants. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just have one comment. I'm a big fan of the way we originally did it, and I think it was the right way for the time. It was basically, and I'm oversimplifying here, you, Mr. Developer, figure out how much money you're going to make in the energy market, in the capacity market, how much your tax credit's going to give you, any other source of income, and now figure out the difference you're going to need to go to the bank to finance your project, compete against each other, and it worked very, very well from about 2007 to 2011 or so because we got a lot of projects competing against each other. Some of the better wind resource projects were available, and it all worked well. Starting 2012, 2013, the uncertainties just started to outweigh the benefits. What was the energy market going to be like when you see gas prices crashing through the floor? What are capacity market payments going to be? Not that wind gets much, but what are they going to be when we're seeing such a fluctuation? The tax credits, as you pointed out, are always up for grabs and nobody knows. And there were fewer and fewer other places to go to look for revenues. Then we started to try to do the same sort of thing, and we got all sorts of projects. It's like, wow, they're 4 and 5 times more expensive than what we've been choosing over the last few years. And so I think an adjustment was necessary to kind of take what I think was a great concept of, I think we use the markets more than ever, to make this a little bit long-term, a little more stable to get us through this period of uncertainty. And then I agree, we'll figure out after 2015 whether this makes sense, whether the old system makes sense, whether something completely new, different, and makes sense. But so I'm in favor of this program, not because I think the old program was set up in any way in a wrong structure. It's just that times have changed and we need a new way of looking at it.
Mr. Hackenborg.
This has been a great trip down memory lane. And, Gary and the chair and Commissioner Berman completely correct in everything that's been said. And the one word, again, that comes to bear in all of this when we started the EAPS proceeding was flexibility, because we never knew we were going down a road we'd never been going down before, and that we knew that it wasn't going to be perfect, and we had to have the availability to institute changes to whatever we were doing. So here we are again, I think, making another positive change to keep New York in the game, because as the chair said, we had just been with some fellow commissioners from other states, and we know there are other states in the Northeast, and everybody would like to take a bite out of everybody else's pie. So we would like to be able to stay ahead and on top of all of this, and this gives us, again, the flexibility to be able to do that. And Tina, as always, everyone gets to see you when you come to present one of these things, and you do a fabulous job.
Thank you, Commissioner. It's very nice of you to say.
Thank you. So I think that, first of all, I also agree. I think this is a great step forward. We do need to do something for the next 2 years. We want to provide some level of certainty, and as Commissioner Sayre noted, the uncertainty really reflects itself in the price premium that consumers end up paying. And who would have ever thunk low gas prices could create such market dislocations, but they do. So we'll we will come back and revisit this. But in the meantime, I'd like to take a vote on the proposal to authorize NYSERDA to increase the maximum length of the renewable portfolio standard main tier contracts to a term not to exceed 20 years. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing no opposition and there being none, the recommendation is accepted and adopted. Thank you, Tina. Very good job.
Thank you.
Now you can continue on. We have another item, which is item 304, and that's the petition of NYSERDA regarding the customer-cited tier unencumbered program funds.
Right. Okay. So we've talked about the main tier. Now we're going to skip over to the customer-sided tier, the part of the RPS program. Every year, NYSERDA is required by a 2010 Commission order to determine at the end of each calendar year the unencumbered balance in each of the 5 programs in the customer-sided tier and file a petition to whether the unused funds should remain in each respective program or should they be transferred to a different program within this customer-sided tier. So it's just taking those unallocated funds and telling the Commission how they're going to, what the dispositions of those funds will be. So I view this as more of a compliance filing. They've been doing this since 2010. When they came in with their filing this year, they had, or NYSERDA reports, a $20.8 million unencumbered balance for all their customer-sided tier programs. And just to remind everybody, the programs that are in the customer-sided tier are solar PV, fuel cells, anaerobic digester gas to electricity technology, on-site wind, and solar thermal. So the unencumbered funds, which equal $20.8 million, what NYSERDA would like to do with those funds is they would like to take part of them and roll them into the anaerobic digester gas program, and then take the remaining $9.2 million and put it in a general funding pool instead of trying to rolling it over to the same technology or trying to figure out where the demand would be for the remainder of 2014. Staff believes this is a very reasonable request. The reason why they're rolling over $11.6 million into the anaerobic digester program is because that was the original funding allocation for 2013. It was unused, partly because there has been a lot of effort to assist farmers on these very complex ADG projects. That's where most of these projects are cited. And there actually was a flurry of activity a couple of years ago, but then all those projects stalled because the economics just weren't working out, even with NYSERDA's incentives. So they've retooled that program, provided for some additional incentives through an order by the Commission, and now in doing a lot of work with the farmers and their consultants to try to get these programs up and running, or these systems up and running. So we think by transferring the 2013 budget, rolling it over into 2014 makes sense. And then staff believes that creating this general funding pool, which is a new concept, is reasonable, because then they don't have to guess where the program demand is going to be in each technology. They'll have a pool of funds. So if any of the technologies use their 2014 budgeted funds, they can, reach into this pool and have additional funding. So the recommendation is to grant NYSERDA the request to reallocate the 2013 unencumbered program funds in the manner that I just described.
Thank you. First of all, I concur, and I think it's both consistent with what I think we need to do. And we spend an awful lot of time thinking about urban issues, I think thinking about rural issues, and providing funding so that we can for farmers, energy ends up being an extremely high expense, and this solves a couple problems. So if we can get the anaerobic program going, I think it would be a great thing for the state. And quite frankly, I think if we can get this technology going, I think it would be a great thing for the country. So I'm very pleased to hear that there's progress being made along there. I also think that the recommendation about putting it into a general fund makes sense, certainly consistent with the ideation behind the Clean Energy Fund, so it's very consistent, so I intend to support both. Any questions for Tina on this matter? Comments?
What's being done to help the farmers in applying for it?
NYSERDA is doing actually a great deal. They have provided some other services and have other consultants to assist with not only taking a look at financing, but there's a lot of engineering studies that are required. I think they're also using some additional funds that NYPA had provided, early on to as a stopgap measure, but also to what other to look at some of the interconnection costs, for these systems to interconnect into the distribution grid, consulting services to figure out how to manage and operate these systems, because it's one thing to, develop it, but once they're up and running, there's a lot of intricacies to keeping these systems going. So they've provided just some support in that respect.
Tina, I'll also mention, just because I happen to remember this, they also are trying to do some geographical grouping of these projects, is my understanding. Because a lot of farms are at the end of a distribution line, the cost of upgrading to sell back into the system on a one-off can be very expensive. If you can find 4 or 5 farms on that feeder that are interested in doing this, the interconnection costs can be shared. And I know NYSERDA was trying to do some work of identifying some locations and grouping them together, which I think is important to make this more economic.
That's correct.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you, because I think it is very important that we make sure that there's a direct interaction and follow-up. Thank you.
Sure.
Any further questions or comments? It's always good to have Commissioner Brown as our resident historian. Glad his memory works better than mine. All right. With that, all those in favor to authorize NYSERDA to allocate unencumbered 2013 program funds in the customer-sided tier in the manner described, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing no opposition, the recommendation is adopted. Thank you, Ms. Palmero.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Do you guys need a break? Are we all right? Looks okay? Yeah, so okay. Just want to make sure. All right, our next item is United Water major rate case. Surprise, everyone's not just leaving. Bye, Michael.
How come nobody's coming up?
Yeah, this is like, I know. You guys, is it something you said? Huh? So this is item 401. It's case number 13W0295, and it's the United Water major rate case. We have the esteemed Honorable Judge David Van Oort is going to be presenting, I believe. Is that correct? And Judge Epstein is also here. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, and good morning, Chair and Commissioners. You have before you a draft order which was prepared in this case, and I'm going to give you a brief summary of the background of this case, hopefully a brief summary of the background of this case, as well as highlight several key provisions of the order. This case began in July of 2013 with the United Water's filing of a request to increase its base rates, equivalent to $21.3 million, or an approximate 29% increase. This case took a different track from many water cases. It was fully litigated, and the parties engaged in discovery and filed testimony and exhibits in response to the company's filing, which is characteristic of all cases, and the company filed rebuttal testimony. The hearings were held in February. Point out that on the two snowiest days in February, we parked everyone in a room and kept them there until we finished. We took testimony of over 20 witness panels and individual witnesses, and there were over 100 exhibits that were admitted into the record. All of the parties in this case submitted post-hearing briefs, and we issued a recommended decision in early April. That was followed by the parties' briefs on exceptions, and there were also public statement hearings held in the latter part of April, in which there were over 70 speakers that made comments, as well as there were over 100 written comments received in this case. Now, the rate increase in this case, the rate increase that was requested, has been pared down substantially through the efforts of the parties in this case and the vetting of issues and the evidentiary hearings. But it still results in a rate increase that is substantial. And one of the things that I note here is that the rate increase could pose some hardships on certain customers. There are three principal drivers for the rate increase, and it's characteristic of cases such as this. It is rate-based, the plant investment that the company has made over the past several years. Property taxes, which are often associated with the rate base, and labor and related expenses. Now, United Water New York has also experienced a significant decrease in sales revenues. Now, the Commission's responsibility in looking at this case is, on the one hand, to protect ratepayers from unreasonable expenses, but on the other hand, to afford the utility an opportunity to earn a reasonable return on its investment, including certain investments that the company may have difficulty controlling. The Commission is legally constrained in that it can't go too far in denying the recovery of legitimate expenses. Certain expenses have to be covered. The rates established by the order that you have before you are designed to maintain safe and reliable service and provide an overall resolution that balances the competing interests of the company and its customers. The public comments that were provided illustrate that in addition to needing to find ways for the company to alleviate the upward pressure on rates, that there is also a pronounced weakness in the quality of relations that exist between United Water New York, its customers, and local authorities. And the draft order identifies several initiatives designed to increase the company's focus on controlling costs and improving those stakeholder relationships. Now, I should also point out that this increase follows on the heels of two prior rate plans, the first one which began in January of 2007, and that the increases for those two rate plans have substantially outpaced the rate of inflation over that period of time. Now, to further ameliorate the economic impact on customers and allow United Water New York additional time before it files its next rate case to work on containment strategies and stakeholder relationships, the order gives the company an option for a second rate year. I should point out that United Water New York is currently eligible to file for new rates next week in July. If they accepted the 2-year or the optional rate plan with it, which provides for the 2 years, that the rates would not be, a new rate filing would not be made until at least July of 2015. The order contains an ROE recommendation that is set at 9%. That 9% is based on the methodology that staff advocated, which the Commission has repeatedly followed in past cases. And there is also, if the company elects the 2-year option, a stay-out premium of 20 basis points that would receive for each of those 2 years. And that 2-year, or the stay-out premium is also consistent with the Commission's past practice. The equity ratio under either scenario, either the 1-year or 2-year plan, would be set at the 44% level that was advocated by trial staff. Now, in addition to receiving the 20 basis points, the stay-out premium for a 2-year option, the company would receive additional revenues to cover certain expected incremental costs, capital investments. They'd also receive related depreciation on those investments and property tax increases, which are expected. And this change would amount to approximately an additional $1.5 million. It should be noted that limiting the second-year recovery of these expenses also provides the company with a strong incentive to minimize its other expenses, the O&M expenses. Now, one of the issues that came up in this case was the company's management of its property tax expenses. And although that is something that the order addresses, the order also recognizes that if the company accepts the 2-year rate plan, there will be some escalation of property taxes associated with the new plant. And the order has a provision that allows or provides for the company to recover a portion of those expenses. They will equally share in expenses above a target for that second year. Lastly, the 2-year provision has an option, or not an option, but a provision that by which the rates or the revenues would be levelized over the 2-year term. The order has several other initiatives designed for the company to control its costs and improve the relationships, as I spoke about a moment ago. There's a provision for a review of the management operations of the company and determine whether it is pursuing all reasonable cost control strategies and optimizing operational efficiencies, as well as mitigating rate increases. There's a piece of that, a separate piece of that, I should say, dealing with the M&S charges that emanate from the management services company to New York. There's 2 pieces of that. They deal with both direct and allocated charges, and those charges have been going up significantly over the past several years. And there will be a comprehensive audit of those charges, and the audit will also look at whether the intercompany agreement that is currently existing is equitable, the methodology that it utilizes. That audit will also consider whether the services provided are the most cost-effective as opposed to alternative service providers. There is a provision in the order that requires the company to report on an annual basis with respect to its filings with the New York State Office of Real Property Tax Services to obtain economic obsolescence awards. That was a key provision or a key argument or issue in this case. The company will also be required to provide a public information improvement plan, and that is designed to improve the customer relationships as well as relationships with local officials. And what it's geared toward is information that would be provided regarding the rate drivers that the company experiences, actions that the company takes to control its costs, and as well as an explanation of those costs that are not within the company's control. For the first time for United Water New York, there'll be a customer service performance incentive mechanism that has two separate parts. One with respect to the customer satisfaction survey results, the second with respect to escalated complaints, and the company would be subject to negative revenue adjustments if it fails the metrics or the threshold under any of the thresholds under those targets. The order contains a provision that is designed for further conservation or promote further water conservation, and that is the elimination of a declining block rate which existed for one class of customers. In sum, the draft order provides a great emphasis on the company mitigating its cost drivers to the extent possible and providing the public with a complete and thorough understanding of what is driving those costs. I should probably point out that, and I'll close by saying that this order has a provision in several places where department staff will be integrally involved in both the formulation of the work plans that the company must formulate to complete its tasks and in monitoring the performance of the company. That's all I have for the comments.
Thank you, Judge Hort. Anyone else adding from the panel? Okay.
Chair, could I just make one or 2 points?
Yes.
The judge excellently highlighted the initiatives that are being recommended here in terms of getting the company to focus on management improvements, efficiencies, the affiliates review, and the additional effort on relationship. And I wanted to point out that these efforts, based on the draft order, would use independent consultants, and those independent consultants would be, the funding for that would come from a redirection of monies that were previously dedicated in the proposal to R&D expenditures, would be redirected to help support with independent consultants that task. I would also just observe that there are 2 other important cases pending involving United Water. One involves the United Water request for a surcharge to recover carrying costs on development costs that are related to its efforts to develop a new long-term water source. And related to that is a separate proceeding that involves the status of the need for a new long-term water supply for the region, and comments on the staff report were recently extended to mid-July for initial and late July for reply. So those matters will come to the Commission at a later point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGowan, for that clarification and addition. First of all, let me I'd say that since I've been here, this is one of our actually more challenging decisions that we've had to deal with. Judge Van White, you did a very nice job of summarizing the various factors that we're looking at. I think we've all read the record here, and we understand that the complexity of what we're dealing with, and putting aside the issue of the need on the desalination plant and the surcharge, we're faced with, I think, a really challenging situation. We have a company that, under its obligation, it needs to make investments in infrastructure because it has an obligation to serve and to make certain that the water in the communities is safe drinking, is safe and as well as available, and that requires a certain amount of investment in old infrastructure. But with a declining rate base, the cost of those investments have a tendency to increase rates. Our obligation is to make certain, under law, is that the company is allowed to recover a return on legitimate investment. I think that was a hotly litigated issue in the rate proceeding, as whether the capital improvements were legitimate. I think the record certainly supports that they were legitimate investments and needed to be made on behalf of making certain that the company was fulfilling its obligation to serve, and that also the company is facing increasing property taxes, which under law as a legitimate expense it has to be able to pass through to consumers. And so those 2 alone expenses areas really make up the bulk, I know, of the increase. The question, and I think that's the question that this order grapples with, and what we're asking the company to grapple with, is moving forward. One is, when we know that there are increasing expenses that maybe or may not be largely controllable, we need to do everything we can to control those expenses. So if there's technology alternatives or rate plan alternatives that could help reduce demand and reduce the need for additional investment or lower cost investment, we would expect companies to do that. And secondarily, if there's other expenses that can be controlled, they need to be controlled, because you can't, on one hand, ask consumers to have to pay for costs that are uncontrollable and not think about, well, what are the expenses we can control? And since regulation largely is a substitute for the market, we know in the competitive arena when companies are facing a situation where their prices may become uneconomic, they look for ways to manage their businesses to drive prices down where they can so that they can offset those expenses that may be going up. And that's really what we expect of our utilities, is to be that focused, not just on meeting their obligation to serve, but the impact they're having on their consumer base, and really look at aggressive ways to maintain affordability. And that's that's true of all companies that we regulate, including water utilities. So I think what the case does is it really does exactly what we have to do under the law, which is to make sure that the company has fair compensation for the investments that it has to make. It recovers legitimate expenses. But at the same time, and I applaud the staff and actually the other interveners in bringing these issues out, it identifies those soft areas where the company clearly can improve. And I believe that the recommendation, which I endorse, about taking the research dollars, which, we always want to look at new and better ways, but this is a company that really needs to focus near term on how they're going to improve service to their consumers, and also how to get the confidence back of the public that they serve. And I think the focused effort on really looking at getting this right, getting this back, so that we're not in a situation which I believe happened in this case, with such antagonism, is not a good way to do business. Nobody really wants to be there, and we need to be listening to what the public is saying about their frustration. And I think what the order does is it really directs the company's attention in those areas where, frankly, people are not happy, they're not satisfied, they're concerned, and they're worried that the company is not meeting their needs. And I think those are legitimate concerns we need to listen to. Certainly in the area for us, when we see year-over-year rate increases, we get concerned about how companies are looking at ways to control their costs, and particularly in this case, where it was found that the company could have taken some efforts more aggressively to reduce its tax expenses and failed to do so. That is a matter of significant concern to the Commission. So I think that the order sets that right balance. It's certainly adhering to our obligation under the law to put rates into place that are compensable for legitimate expenses. But at the same time, sets what I believe is a good path that I hope the company adopts, which is in particular the alternative of the 2 years that gives the company an opportunity to say, let's get focused on business instead of rate cases, and let's try to get this thing right so that the company's in a better position in terms of its public, and we all have the confidence that their expenses are being managed in the best interest of their consumers, who, after all, have no choice but to accept the service. So let's get it as good as possible. So I endorse it. I appreciate all the efforts that have been made on this. I appreciate also the creativity of the staff in coming up with solutions. I think that certainly the 2-year rate option and the idea of taking monies that would otherwise gone into research and redeploying them into improving service is a really good outcome. So thank you, and I will now open it up to further comments. Commissioner Ackman-Pora.
Thank you. I was present at the public statement hearings and took copious notes, which I shared with my fellow commissioners, because in many times we find out when we attend public statement hearings, we have that opportunity to really listen to what bothers the public. And believe me, the public was quite bothered by the potentiality of a huge rate increase. But as the chair aptly stated, and the judge, we have obligations under the law to the company for expenses that they have to do business in order to serve the public. But there are areas that we have found, and in this order, I think addresses all that, where the company really needs to go and bring back the trust of the public. People are upset in Rockland and Orange counties, and they're upset for good reasons for a lot of things. But it isn't only this company that bears a burden of responsibility to the public. It are other entities who do tax the public, and so they took a lot of their frustrations out in this particular case. We really, I have to say, the staff worked very diligently in making sure we looked at everything here. Everything has been looked at with a fine-tooth comb in order to bring those numbers down. And I think with the option of the 2-year rate case, we have done that. But we will work with the company to, again, make sure that in order serving the public that they serve, and there's some 74,000 customers that they serve, that they, again, make every effort to bring back the trust that the public puts in them for water. Water, as we all know, it's the one utility and that we really do need. I know we love our electric and we love gas and we love telecom, but we really do need water in order to live. And people want to make sure that not only is their water safe, it's affordable, and the people who are delivering this entity to them are doing the best job possible. So I think that this order really fulfills the efforts that we have legally under statute, and also allows us to work with the company, our staff. People did at the public statement hearing talk about audits, and we are going to look at that service company before we go forward and do anything else. But the door remains open based upon what we find out. So I think that this was a monumental effort. As said by the chair, this was one of the more challenging rate cases we've had in a long time. And I think, to the best of our abilities, it's come out as fairly as it possibly could be. So I thank everybody for their efforts.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown? Further comments, Commissioner Sayre?
I think it's very unfortunate that the company appears to have gotten into an adversarial relationship with its customers, elected officials, and other stakeholders. I really look forward to seeing the company take the lead in turning this situation around. Given the limited supplies of water that are available to the company in this service territory, it appears to me that it would be in everybody's best interests for everybody to cooperate on conservation plans and measures, improved service, and other efforts that can help contain future costs. I hope this can be accomplished.
Thank you. Commissioner Berman? So, then we can move on to the vote then. Is all those in favor of the recommendations to set rates for United Water New York, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing no opposition, there being none, the recommendations are adopted. Thank you, and thank you again, not just to staff, but for everyone involved in this complex proceeding. We're going to move now to the consent agenda. Do any of the commissioners want to recuse or abstain them from any voting on the consent agenda? Are there any comments on the consent agenda? Commissioner Berman.
I just have two quick comments. On item 264, which is National Grid's opt-out of using AMR devices, I just want to note this is the first time that the Commission is addressing meter opt-out, and I just want to say on National Grid, I think this is really kudos to them in caring about customer choice and coming up with a strategic way of really balancing the customers who want to potentially opt out in a reasonable way without burdening the other ratepayers. And I'm glad to see that they did this, and I know that there may be other petitions and other utilities looking at this, and I think they did a good job in trying to figure out how to handle this controversial issue. So thank you on that. The other item, 462, this is the Glenwood petition, the emergency approval of a water supply agreement. This is in Nassau County on Long Island, and just for my sister happens to live in Roslyn, which is there, though I don't think she's even aware of this issue, but just so everyone knows, just want people to know that we're acting in an emergency capacity to preserve the public health and general welfare of the Glenwood residents while not jeopardizing the interest of the water company or ratepayers living in the Seacliff district. And this water supply agreement between New York Water Company and Glenwood Water District is a positive resolution to an unfortunate circumstance. And I think this is a classic example of when we have to regulate in an emergency capacity, we can do it right, we can do it in a quick fashion, and we could help a community that really needs it. And this only affects, I think, 109 customers, and we got it right, and this is a good thing. So thank you.
Thank you. And now you can go to your sister's house and drink the water. All right, so all those in favor of the recommendations on the consent agenda, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Hearing no opposition or being no opposition, the recommendations are adopted. Secretary Burgess, are there any other matters that come before us today?
There are no other matters for today. The next time the Commission will be meeting will be July 10th. It's a technical conference in the REV proceeding, and that session is going to be held in Meeting Room 6 in the Empire State Plaza off the concourse. And that will begin at 9 a.m.
Thank you. Wish you all a happy 4th. See you in July.